Hello. So today we're working on the land we live on. So before colonial times, there were people living in this land that we live on now, and they're called indigenous people broadly. So indigenous captures the first people, the people that were there before European colonialists kind of took over so many places. So like in Australia, the indigenous people are the Aboriginal people. And here we call them Native Americans. America is a new term, like that happened during colonial times. So they all have their own names, depending on which people group, because it's the Native American groups were very diverse. Like there are the Powhatans and the Cherokee and the Chinook tribes and nations and empires, sometimes they were called. And so it's a very diverse history. And our historical knowledge of indigenous people is limited. Our understanding is still increasing today. Archaeologists are studying they're digging up artifacts and looking at old artifacts. And there's people that are really dedicated to preserving the culture. And so they're interviewing Native Americans and the descendants of people from long ago to try to capture the history and the story and the culture. So some of the factors that have made it difficult to capture all of this is that a lot of Native American history was passed down through a tradition of oral history. So they didn't have books pre-colonial times, and so you can't just find an old book and see what happened. They passed down their stories by memory and talking. Many Native Americans died either from European diseases or also from systematic genocide, where the European immigrants did not want to compete with Native Americans for their land. So they were murdered, essentially. Many natives were forced from their land. You've heard of reservations and maybe you've heard of the Trail of Tears where they were like moved off of their land. And so remember that Native American culture is very dependent on which kind of land they live in. Remember that the diversity we've been studying, where there's very different practices if you're living like in coastal California versus like the Great Plains with the buffalo. And so when they're forced to move off their land, then there's a lot lost there. And also often Americans intentionally suppress Native language and culture, making it illegal to carry on their own heritage. I lived in Alaska for a little bit while I was teaching, and I witnessed kind of the beautiful new shift in education. So when the schools first started there in this village called Unalakleet, the kids went to school and it was not allowed for them to speak in the language that they knew that their parents were speaking with them, the native language. And they would get in trouble for it. Even though they didn't know English, they would get in trouble if they were speaking in the other language. So that was a while ago. But then since then, the like grandkids of those kids, the school system has been enlightened and realized, oh, we need to preserve this culture. So now they have like native classes in the school to teach these kids their heritage, the language of their grandparents. And they're teaching them like how to sew Mlektuks. I can't quite remember the name. Anyway, that like these like leather boots and gloves, and they're like teaching them like the dance and everything, and they're trying to preserve this culture because it's so important, and it will get lost if we don't do something about it. So today you're exploring a few different things: a Native American map, and you're going to learn on one side, reflect on the other. And the reflection doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just make sure you show me that you've engaged in the material and give me just a few details so that I know that you've thought about it. But don't stress out about this part. So there's some maps, some language stuff to look at, timelines. You don't have to read every single little thing. But there's also a video at the end to watch that'll kind of show you the Native American perspective now. And a new term, blood quantum. So I actually have some Native American history, but not enough blood to be considered Native American, where I could actually join the Cherokee tribe where I have some ancestry from.